So this is the Panasonic GH5, my new primary camera, and it's awesome. There's a whole lot of things that I really love about this camera, and while it's only micro four thirds, which seems to be a problem for some people, I've personally loved it. It's been great so far. Pairing this up with a nice fancy lens like the one I got on now, and this will set you back around 3,000 bucks, which is, well, awesome. Actually, it's got some crazy features. It does 10-bit internally, 422, all-eye video. I bought this not only for my YouTube videos, but also for my professional work, because that 10-bit 422 is just money when you're working professionally. But you know what else takes great videos? My iPhone. In fact, I probably use my phone as a camera more than I use my actual camera for a camera. Granted, I have had it longer, but even still, it's great for capturing Instagram stories. Plug. When I'm not able to use my GH5, this thing almost always comes out my pocket, so I'm ready to capture some behind the scenes, because to this day, I have still neglected to get a B cam. But through doing this, I've actually been pretty pleased with the image if you set it up right. And if you spend enough time with the footage, you can actually get some pretty close cuts between the two. So today, I wanted to ask the age-old question, can you tell the difference? There might be a motion title there. Not sponsored. Motion Array, if you're watching, hit me up. Both shoot 4K, slow-mo, and time-lapses internally. So let's jump into some side-by-sides and see if you guys can tell the difference. Okay, so I am back. It is so hot outside today. Can you see how red my skin is? That's not color shift, that's just vasodilation. So if you couldn't tell, camera A was the iPhone and camera B was the GH5. Did you get it? Let me know in that poll up there. I did think there were some pretty big giveaways, one being the color science of the Panasonic. I shot it straight at a camera in the Cine V profile, and it has this super pleasing look to it that by default just looks cinematic. And I think another thing was the dynamic range. If we look closely, we can see the GH5 has a much more pleasing highlight roll-off, and overall a lot more dynamic range than the iPhone, especially in difficult situations like this one. During all these shots, I had the GH5 in UHD 4K. It can go up to DCI 4K, but seeing as the iPhone only shoots UHD 4K, I put the GH5 in the same mode so I could easily match them in post. On the GH4, I also shot in the all-eye codec, which is a super buff codec. If you didn't already know, it goes up to 400 megabits per second. Just crazy amounts of data, and it's actually one of the main reasons why I bought the GH5. Now, let's take a look at some shots in my studio, and here the difference becomes much less noticeable because we have control of the lighting, and it's not actually until we start pixel peeping that we can see huge differences. As we can see, the camera on the left has more dynamic range, so again, that's obviously the GH5, and I do have to say that's probably the main benefit of getting a more professional camera. Now, I do have to say from this point on, if it wasn't already obvious, the GH5 is going to take a fairly strong lead. Obviously, the $3,000 camera is going to be better than the phone. I just want to see how much worse it is, how it compares, and how usable it is for taking videos. As we start to take a look at some harsher environments, we can see the GH5 starts to destroy the iPhone. It gives a much more pleasing roll-off, and because of that all-eye codec, there's a lot more information to work with in the highlights, leading me on to the next point, which is post-production. Because of that higher bitrate as well as the 10-bit 422 codec, the GH5 obliterates the iPhone when it comes to post-production. You can push the colors like crazy, and again, this is another one of the main reasons why I bought this GH5 in the first place. I love color grading, and even things like sharpening are significantly better with the GH5 for obvious reasons. The iPhone natively only shoots in a bitrate of 47 megabits per second in 4K, which is almost 10 times less data to work with in post. And while the 4K on the iPhone can look great at a camera, in post it really does start to slack behind. Granted, with the iPhone, I did actually use a third-party app which allowed me to record in a bitrate of 120 megabits per second, and that did allow me to get a bit more creative in post, but still, it's a long way off the GH5. With the custom codec and bitrate from the Pro Movie app, which I strongly recommend you get, it's only like £3 and it's crazy good, there was significantly more grading potential with the iPhone, and I was actually fairly impressed with how far I could push the image compared to some other phone cameras I've tried in the past. Don't get me wrong, it's still a long way off the GH5, but for quick inserts, yeah, it's fairly impressive. In terms of pixel quality, if we do a really destructive grade, so shadows all the way up, highlights all the way down, max contrast, crazy curves, then we see much less banding on the GH5 thanks to that strong codec. Now, obviously, this has no real world use, but the purpose of this was more to see how long it would take for the files to degrade. All in all, I really do like the way that there is some potential for grading with the iPhone, and I have to say, the people at Pro Movie and Apple have done a fantastic fantastic job with the camera on this phone. But yeah, again, when you put this thing under stress, it doesn't handle all that well. This honestly shouldn't be anything new because we're comparing a device that's primarily a phone to a $3,000 monster the Panasonic themselves said is geared more towards video despite being a stills camera. I've always been impressed by how good the GH5 looks, even with the less than ideal lighting here. Here, I purposefully blew out the highlights, and because of how strong that codec is, I was able to recover a ton of data, which is super important if you're going for that cinematic look. With the iPhone, hotspots were much more blown out and pretty much impossible to recover from, so I recommend slightly underexposing the image, then bringing that back in post. Add noise reduction if you need to, and by doing this, you're going to have a much higher chance of your shot being usable. In terms of features, I said both cameras shoot slow motion and time lapses, and first of all, slow motion, because I love it. Everybody loves slow motion. If you say you don't love slow motion, you're lying. The GH5 can do 60 FPS at 4K and 180 frames per second in 1080p. I personally prefer to leave this at 120 though, because at 180 it does take a serious hit on the quality, so I'd rather sacrifice slightly slower motion for a serious bump in quality. Now, something that I've always been impressed by on the GH5 is the 120p slow motion. It's super solid, very little aliasing and moire, pretty good in low light, no autofocus, which kinda sucks, but I can personally live without that. Overall, the 120p on the GH5 is a very clean image. Taking a look at the iPhone's 120p, it's also pretty good. There is more aliasing and moire, but it does have autofocus. I mean, obviously, unless there's like a tiny focus ring at the back where you can manually pull focus. Apple, you should add that. Leave a comment if you think Apple should add that on the next iPhone. The only problem with the autofocus in 120p is that it does tend to hunt a lot on the iPhone. So that kind of sucks, but it's better than nothing. $3,000 camera with no autofocus in 120p. The iPhone also does 240 FPS in 720p, but again, there is a significant quality loss compared to the 120, which is why I thought it was best that we compare both cameras at 120p, because they seem to both be fairly solid at this point. Stop going off. I need the blue background light, otherwise it's just yellow. Doesn't help that I'm wearing a yellow t-shirt either. I have a lot of yellow t-shirts. I've actually been noticing I've been wearing yellow t-shirts a lot in my videos recently. If we take a look at these side by side, we can see a difference in quality, but if you're in a pinch and you want some of that crispy 120p action, then yeah, feel free to use your iPhone. Following on, we have the time-lapse mode. Both of these cameras can produce time-lapse videos internally. You actually have more controls with the GH5, so if you want to shoot raw and then process it in post for maximum quality, that is an option on the GH5. On the iPhone, the time lapses are still solid. In fact, I used one of the iPhone time lapse in my previous video, which is up there. And hey, no one complained about that, so yeah, I found a little bit of a drop of dynamic range compared to the standard shooting mode on the iPhone, but if you set it up right, then you can definitely get some usable results, certainly good enough for a vlog or a behind the scenes. Now, despite the fact that the iPhone has seemed to lose in almost every aspect so far, there are some areas where this thing is just blatantly better. For one thing, it's significantly cheaper than the GH5. You can pick up my particular model for around $500 new nowadays, which is 6 times cheaper than my GH5 setup. You also don't need to buy a lens. There's one included with the iPhone, which makes it cheaper still, because to really take advantage of the GH5, you do have to rig it out a little. Comparing this to the iPhone, other than the app, I shot this thing stock. The iPhone is also a lot more discreet. This thing is giant, this thing fits in my pocket. And this is honestly great if you want to film in an area where people are gonna hassle you. For example, I have a story that took place last Christmas. It was 4 days before Christmas, and I was doing all of my Christmas shopping. Where I live, every year we have a massive Christmas light show. So what did I do? I took my Sony a6500, which is actually smaller than this camera. I took it and decided to film some beautiful looking B-roll of my town at Christmas. In particular, there's a shopping center where they like hang stuff down from the ceiling. It looks incredible. So I'm just filming the lights, keeping to myself, minding my own business, you know. Out of nowhere, a security guard comes up to me and says, hey, you got a license to be filming in here? No, I haven't. Yeah, you need a license to be filming in this public shop. Yeah, you need a license to be filming in this shopping center. I don't know how laws work around the world, but in the UK, you can film pretty much anywhere in public, and that includes shopping centers, as long as you're not doing it commercially. And I told him that, but still he said, no, you can't film in here. Sorry. Using a phone opposed to a giant camera setup is a lot more discreet, so it will just save you the hassle of situations like that. The smaller size also means that accessories are significantly cheaper for this than with my big camera. For example, this is the gimbal I have to use with my Panasonic Panasonic GH5 to support the payload. This thing is gigantic and it's not cheap either. In fact, it's just under 400 bucks. Whereas I've seen some really good phone gimbals under 100 bucks, which is just gonna save you a little bit more money. This thing is pretty incredible compared to around 5 years ago. It still may have been super obvious to some of you. I haven't seen the poll yet, but when in trouble, the iPhone is definitely capable of rescuing a shoot. That said, I do still think there are 3 things that separate phones from these big professional cameras. As I said, the GH5 shoots in a much higher bitrate, which means recovering details in the shadows and highlights is much more doable, leading on to number 2, which is dynamic range. The iPhone isn't atrocious by any standards, but there's just something magical about having a high dynamic range, which the GH5 can provide. As I said, it's no longer like it was 5 years ago, where the expensive cameras are incredible and the phone cameras were unusable for anything but social media stuff. It's now got to the point where these expensive cameras are still incredible, but it's now got to the point where phone cameras are usable for inserts, or again, even just as B cams. And when I'm saying this, I am practicing what I'm preaching. I have used my phone for inserts. In fact, back in the day, I recorded almost an entire vlog on my iPhone. I remember I went to Drayton Manor for the day, and while I did have my camera with me, I left it in the car because I didn't want it getting broken or stolen. And when I posted that video, which is long gone now, no one complained about the phone inserts quality. People were simply just talking about how good the roller coasters looked, and that's often the case in the real world. 99% of the time, pixel peeping isn't worth it, especially if you're filming roller coasters. In fact, at this point in time, I honestly don't think I would consider buying a point and shoot camera. I know there are some super professional ones with like mic jacks and stuff like that, all the good stuff, but they're usually super big, and this fits in my pocket. So if I have to trade off a little bit of quality for a ton more portability, I see no reason why this shouldn't replace a point and shoot for me. Okay, this has been a super long but fun one today. Thank you guys for watching. Remember to like the video if you want to see more content like this, and smash that subscribe button. I'm trying to hit 10K by the end of July, so every single subscription is massively appreciated. I'm done for now, and I will catch you guys in the next one.
Rolled up in that big truck with them guns up for them fuck boys. Smoked out in that Rolls Royce, blowing dope with that bad broad. Shorty know what I got, cash, I'm throw it all if she want that. Every time you see me out, blow trees out my blunt fat, cause I'm rich. Dumping the clip on a bitch, it hold her smoking, I exit the switch. Step to the mic, I live in the misfit. She steady working it, twerk on the dick, I'm with the shit and I get it.